He ruled the city's fashion empire without ever sewing a single stitch. If you love stories about power, rackets, and the silent machinery of organized crime, make sure to follow, because this one exposes how the clothes on your back built a mafia fortune. Manhattan, 1947, 7:45 a.m. Delivery trucks crowd West 36th Street. Men in rolled-up sleeves unload boxes marked Silk Imports Limited and Empire Dress Co. The air smells of steam, fabric glue, and diesel. The sewing machines inside the loft buildings hum non-stop. Every dress, coat, and pair of trousers sold in America seems to pass through this neighborhood. The world calls it the Garment District. The men who really run it don't appear on any payroll. Union officials collect envelopes every Friday. Trucking companies charge whatever they please. Factory owners pay insurance to keep business running smoothly. Behind it all sits the mafia, turning one of America's most legitimate industries into a gold mine. The system began in the 1930s. When labor unions rose to protect garment workers, organized crime moved in to control them. The unions could make or break a business overnight. One strike could bankrupt a manufacturer in days. The man who controlled the strike controlled the money. Albert Anastasia, then an up-and-coming mob enforcer under the Mangano family, recognized the opportunity. He and his associates placed loyal men inside the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America. These men weren't interested in workers' rights. They were interested in control. By 1940, no garment could move across Manhattan without the mafia's permission. The mob controlled the trucking firms that hauled fabric from the docks to the sewing floors and finished garments from the factories to the stores. Every load paid a cut. Some truckers were legitimate businessmen forced to cooperate. Others were front companies owned by the mob itself. The most important of these belonged to Thomas Gambino, the son of Carlo Gambino, who would soon rise to be boss of the Gambino crime family. Each morning, freight lines ran through the same narrow streets, West 35th to 39th between 7th and 9th Avenues. It looked like ordinary commerce. It was, in fact, a carefully managed monopoly. Any factory owner who tried to use an independent trucking service found his deliveries lost, his drivers threatened, or his warehouse mysteriously burned. Factory bosses paid whatever rate the mob demanded, because the alternative was ruin. Union racketeering provided the second income stream. The mafia's men positioned themselves as business agents or labor consultants. They negotiated contracts between garment workers and factory owners, then demanded kickbacks from both sides. Union dues flowed upward, skimmed in envelopes and distributed through the families. A single local could yield hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in cash. No receipts. No paper trail. By the mid-1940s, the garment trade was booming again after wartime shortages. Women wanted new dresses. Department stores placed massive orders. The mafia's profits soared. Industry insiders estimated that 10% of all shipping costs went into mob pockets. Legitimate businessmen had no way to fight back. The police treated it as a labor issue. Federal agents lacked jurisdiction over intracity trucking. The racket was invisible, protected by fear and routine. The Gambino family inherited the system in the 1950s. Carlo Gambino, quiet and methodical, expanded what Anastasia had built. While other bosses fought over gambling or narcotics, Gambino focused on labor and logistics, steady, low-risk cash. His strategy was simple: control every point between the factory and the department store counter. Trucking, warehousing, freight forwarding, even the plastic bags that wrapped finished garments. Each layer provided another opportunity to skim. In 1951, state investigators opened hearings on racketeering in the garment industry. Business owners testified behind screens to hide their faces. One described how union agents demanded weekly envelopes of $50 to $100 for labor peace. Another said he paid mob truckers double the normal rate to keep his shipments moving. The New York Crime Commission confirmed what everyone in the district already knew: the mafia owned the street. Federal prosecutors tried to break the system by targeting corrupt union officials. They indicted Louis Lepke Buchalter, an earlier racketeer who had run labor extortion rings in the 1930s. But by then, his organization, Murder Incorporated, was gone. The control of the garment district had passed to the next generation. The names changed. Gambino, Della Croce, Castellano. The structure remained the same. Throughout the 1950s, the garment district operated like a company town. Over 7,000 factories produced clothing worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Most occupied small loft spaces, each employing fewer than 100 workers. The mafia didn't need to own the factories, it just needed to tax their movement. Every box, every truckload, every labor contract produced another stream of cash. The government occasionally struck back. In 1953, the New York District Attorney's Office subpoenaed records from Garment Center Trucking Association, a consortium suspected of being mob-run. The records showed inflated invoices and phantom deliveries, but witnesses refused to testify. Those who talked received anonymous phone calls or found their trucks vandalized. No convictions followed. The money filtered upward through layers of shell companies. Mob accountants booked the income as freight charges, consulting fees, or labor settlements. Federal income tax agents found nothing unusual. The sums were spread thin across hundreds of fronts, but in total it was immense. Investigators later estimated that by the late 1950s, the Gambino family was earning between $20 and $30 million annually from the garment industry alone, equivalent to hundreds of millions today. Inside the district, the rules were clear. Pay your dues, use the approved truckers, and your business thrived. Refuse and the trucks stopped coming. In one documented case, a dress manufacturer on West 38th Street, who hired an independent carrier, saw his shipments blocked at the loading docks. Union pickets appeared overnight. After 3 days, he paid the consulting fee. The pickets vanished. The trucks returned. No one called it extortion. They called it the system. It had existed for decades and seemed unchangeable. The mob didn't need guns to enforce it. The threat of delay, strike, or sabotage was enough. By 1957, the system reached its peak. That year, Carlo Gambino attended a secret meeting of national mafia leaders in Appalachian, New York. Federal agents raided the gathering, exposing the existence of a national crime syndicate. Newspapers published the story for weeks. But back in Manhattan, nothing changed. The sewing machines kept running. The envelopes kept moving. For the average New Yorker, the garment district looked like legitimate commerce. Men in suits, women pushing racks of dresses, trucks loading boxes. But underneath the surface, the mafia had transformed an entire industry into a private treasury. And as the post-war economy exploded, so did their profits. By 1960, the garment district moved nearly a third of all women's clothing sold in America. More than 80,000 people worked there. The mafia still ran the streets. The structure was simple. Each mob-controlled trucking company paid tribute to the Gambino family. Each union official kicked a percentage of dues upward. Money flowed from the sewing floors to the top of the organization, one envelope at a time. Thomas Gambino, son of Carlo, managed the system with quiet efficiency. He operated from a small office near 7th Avenue, registered as a freight consultant. On paper, his companies, Consolidated Carriers, Dial Trucking, and Conway Transport, looked legitimate. In reality, they formed a monopoly that strangled competition across Manhattan's fashion center. Every garment shipment entering or leaving Midtown passed through those firms. Manufacturers paid whatever rates Thomas set. No one refused. Independent carriers who tried to operate in the district found their trucks vandalized or slashed. A single missed delivery could cost a factory its retail contract. The risk wasn't worth it. Federal investigators called it the garment cartel. They estimated the network handled 90% of the district's freight. Each delivery paid a small surcharge that went straight to Gambino-controlled accounts. By the mid-1960s, Thomas Gambino was earning more than most Wall Street executives, without a single invoice to prove extortion. The unions remained another pillar. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union, ILGW, and Amalgamated Clothing Workers were huge political forces. Their locals had long histories of fighting for fair wages and safer conditions, but local chapters in Manhattan became infected with mob influence. Business agents who resisted were intimidated or bought off. The mob used paper locals, fake union offices with just a handful of members, to skim dues and control votes during leadership elections. One internal report from 1964 documented over 40 phantom locals tied to organized crime. They existed only on paper, but collected real money from employers eager to avoid strikes. The result? Peaceful contracts that cost extra, paid to mafia intermediaries. Carlo Gambino preferred discretion over violence. Under his leadership, the family avoided the street wars that destroyed other syndicates. While the Genovese and Colombo families fought bloody internal feuds, the Gambinos got rich quietly. Their power came from paperwork, not bullets, labor contracts, delivery schedules, union rosters. The racket expanded beyond New York. Gambino-affiliated truckers began shipping to New Jersey, Long Island, and Pennsylvania, extending mob control over the regional apparel supply chain. Some companies were outright owned by the family. Others were coerced into exclusive agreements. Each operation kicked back a share of profits. In 1967, the New York State Commission of Investigation launched another probe into racketeering in the garment district. Investigators subpoenaed union records and freight contracts. Witnesses admitted paying bribes to consultants to secure trucking routes. The Commission's report described the industry as a continuing criminal enterprise under labor management guise. But without cooperating witnesses, the case stalled. The mob's influence reached City Hall and Albany. Politicians relied on campaign donations and labor endorsements. When reformers tried to regulate freight rates or require union transparency, bills died in committee. Behind closed doors, lobbyists tied to the garment trade argued that stricter laws would harm small businesses. The money trail was difficult to trace. Mob accountants layered transactions through front corporations. One example, Saratoga Freight Lines, nominally owned by a former truck dispatcher, funneled hundreds of thousands in equipment rentals to shell companies registered in Florida and the Bahamas. The IRS found no violations. Everything was technically legal. By the early 1970s, the garment district had changed physically. Tall office towers replaced some of the older lofts, but the economic system remained frozen. The mob collected quietly year after year. Paul Castellano, Carlo Gambino's cousin and successor, inherited the family after Gambino's death in 1976. Castellano ran the empire like a corporate CEO. He focused on white-collar crime, construction, food distribution, and garment trucking. His personal interest in efficiency earned him the nickname the Pope. Castellano kept Thomas Gambino as his key contact in the garment trade. Together they maintained the trucking monopoly through the Garment Center Trucking Association, a consortium of 30 companies that effectively operated as one. Manufacturers complained privately about inflated rates. Publicly they called it standard pricing. No one wanted trouble. The few who defied the system paid heavily. In 1977, a small dress manufacturer in Midtown signed a contract with an independent hauler. Within a week, his drivers were attacked outside the Lincoln Tunnel. His trucks were slashed with knives. The police called it vandalism. He returned to the approved carrier list the next day. During this period, the FBI began building long-term cases under the new Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, RICO. Passed in 1970, for the first time, prosecutors could charge entire networks, not just individuals, for organized criminal patterns. But applying RICO required proof that the mob truly operated the garment district as an enterprise. That evidence was hard to gather. Witnesses feared retaliation. Bookkeeping records looked ordinary. One break came in 1978 when federal agents flipped a mid-level union officer named Vincent Cafaro. He described in detail how the Gambino and Genovese families coordinated labor rackets. According to Cafaro, each garment company paid a labor peace fee, funneled through friendly business agents. The money was divided evenly between the families controlling the local. Cafaro's testimony confirmed decades of rumors, but wasn't enough for a full conviction. The 1970s also brought modernization. Container shipping and overseas production began pulling business away from Manhattan. Yet even as factories closed, the mafia continued to profit. They controlled warehousing, freight forwarding, and customs brokerage, the logistical spine of the apparel trade. As long as goods entered or left the city, there was money to skim. In 1979, the New York Daily News published an investigative series titled The Mob's Hidden Empire. Reporters traced dozens of garment trucking firms back to Gambino associates. They named Thomas Gambino directly as the silent boss of 7th Avenue. The series triggered congressional hearings. Senator Henry Jackson demanded federal oversight of union and trucking operations. Thomas Gambino denied all allegations. No charges were filed. Behind closed doors, the FBI kept collecting intelligence. Wiretaps on Castellano's Staten Island home captured conversations referencing the kids downtown and the clothes money. Agents interpreted the terms as shorthand for the garment district operations. But Castellano spoke in codes and euphemisms. Nothing in the transcripts met courtroom standards. By 1980, the garment district looked cleaner on the surface. New glass buildings, trade shows, international buyers, but the same invisible network still extracted its share. For half a century, the mafia had transformed the city's fashion heart into a quiet financial engine. The federal government was about to strike back harder than ever before. The next phase would expose the full architecture of the mafia's economic control and bring down the men who turned sewing machines into cash registers for organized crime. Federal agents moved quietly through the morning fog outside a warehouse on West 38th Street. Inside, rows of trucks sit idle. Company logos read Consolidated Carriers and Dial Transport, both controlled by the Gambino family. Search warrants authorized the seizure of records, ledgers, and contracts. For the first time in decades, law enforcement has the legal tools to dismantle the garment district empire. The RICO Act has changed everything. Investigators can now charge the entire hierarchy, bosses, capos, soldiers, for participating in a single criminal enterprise. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, led by Rudolph Giuliani, begins tracing the garment trucking network as part of a broader attack on the five families. Wiretaps record conversations from Paul Castellano's home on Tot Hill, Staten Island. In one, Castellano complains about the kids downtown being late with payments. Agents believe he's referring to the garment district collections. The tapes don't mention names, but the pattern is clear. Money flows from trucking to Castellano's headquarters. On December 16, 1985, Castellano is assassinated outside Sparks Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan, shot 6 times on the sidewalk. The hit, ordered by John Gotti, ends the old-world corporate era of the Gambino family, but the garment district remains profitable. Gotti, though flashier and more reckless, keeps the revenue streams intact. His underboss, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, oversees business interests. Gravano later describes the system simply: every truck, every rack of dresses paid tribute. Through the 1980s, the FBI intensifies surveillance. Agents tail drivers, monitor loading docks and subpoena bank accounts. They discover how the mob integrated into legitimate trade associations. The Garment Center Trucking Association, a consortium of 30 companies, acts as a facade for coordinated price fixing. Federal auditors review invoices showing uniform rate increases, identical down to the cent. That level of uniformity, prosecutors argue, proves collusion. The same year, the New York State Organized Crime Task Force releases a 200-page report documenting systematic control of garment trucking by the Gambino family. The report details kickbacks from trucking firms, intimidation of independent operators, and union manipulation. It names Thomas Gambino as the key link between the legitimate freight industry and organized crime. Thomas avoids public attention. He appears polite, soft-spoken, and impeccably dressed, fitting for a man who profits from fashion. He denies all allegations, telling reporters he is a businessman in transportation logistics. But investigators trace millions in assets, warehouses, distribution hubs, and luxury apartments, all purchased through holding companies tied to his network. In 1988, federal prosecutors finally strike. An indictment charges Thomas Gambino and 56 others under RICO, alleging extortion, bid rigging, and monopolization of garment trucking. The case, United States versus Gambino Italiano, becomes one of the largest labor racketeering trials in U.S. history. The prosecution presents decades of evidence, wiretaps, financial ledgers, and testimony from truckers who paid labor peace fees. One witness, a driver named Anthony Riccio, describes delivering cash envelopes every Friday to a consultant's office on West 37th Street. The consultant, he testifies, worked directly for Thomas Gambino. Another witness recounts being told that hiring a non-approved trucking company would Get your doors welded shut, defense. Attorneys argue that the trucking association simply stabilized. Chaotic market conditions. They portray their clients as legitimate businessmen maintaining order in a competitive industry. The jury deliberates for 10 days. In 1992, Thomas Gambino receives a 5-year prison sentence for racketeering and tax evasion. He serves less than 2 years. But the conviction cracks the foundation of mafia control. Meanwhile, globalization hits the industry harder than any law enforcement action. By the early 1990s, garment manufacturing begins shifting overseas, first to Puerto Rico and Korea, then to China and Bangladesh. Thousands of midtown factories close. Empty lofts convert into office space. The mafia's local dominance erodes as physical production leaves the city. Without domestic factories, there are fewer deliveries to control, fewer dues to collect. The FBI's commission trial of 1986-1987 has already weakened the 5 families. Bosses from the Genovese, Lucchese, and Colombo families receive long sentences. The garment rackets, once untouchable, are now radioactive. Business owners cooperate with investigators, no longer fearing retaliation. Federal agents estimate that, at its height, the mafia earned over $50 million annually from the garment district through trucking fees, union skims, and extortion payments. The number collapses to a fraction by 1995. Many of the old mob truckers retire or go legitimate. Their sons open real freight companies in New Jersey or Long Island, operating within the law. Still, traces of the old system linger. In 1997, investigators uncover a smaller scheme involving fake garment orders and laundering profits through import-export firms. The suspects include former associates of the Gambinos. But the scale is nothing compared to earlier decades. By the turn of the millennium, the garment district streets look different. The sewing shops are gone. Designers occupy glass offices. The air, once thick with fabric dust, smells of coffee and car exhaust. The mafia's presence has faded, but the legacy remains. In higher prices, shuttered factories, and decades of intimidation woven into the city's history. Union archives later reveal the full cost. Between 1950 and 1985, the mob siphoned hundreds of millions from workers' pensions and benefit funds through fraudulent consulting fees and phony contracts. The money vanished into shell companies and offshore accounts. No one recovered it. Former mobsters turned informants describe the operation with precision. One recalls, "We didn't own the business. We owned the right to do business." That sentence defines the mafia's economic genius. They taxed productivity without producing anything. By the early 2000s, federal prosecutors declare the garment district racket defunct. The combination of RICO convictions, globalization, and declining union power ends 50 years of mob rule. The FBI closes its dedicated garment center task force. Reporters call it the quiet death of a criminal dynasty. Today, visitors walking along 7th Avenue see fashion showrooms, design schools, and high-rise apartments. Few notice the loading docks bricked over, or the faded signs of trucking firms long disappeared. Beneath the polished storefronts lies the memory of an empire built on extortion, secrecy, and silent agreements. For half a century, the mafia turned New York's fashion industry into a personal treasury. They never needed guns or casinos, just contracts, trucks, and fear. At the height of their power, every bolt of cloth, every dress, every shipment of suits carried a hidden tax. The mob didn't just make millions from the garment district. They made the city itself pay tribute. And when the factories closed, the silence on West 38th Street sounded like the end of an era.